Michigan, they didn't showcase themselves. They didn't make an opening statement. Sherrone Moore didn't, and they haven't been interviewed, their players, yet. That's tomorrow. But Michigan's roster, I think, and I've made several comments and videos about this with a lot of evidence, their roster is still loaded despite the fact they only returned 40% of their production and only one offensive starter. A lot of the offense has rightful questions, but you figure that some balls will bounce Michigan's way there, some won't. But the defense, do you think that the defense can yet again be one of the nation's best, even with all they lose? Because I think they can.
Yeah, it's Michigan's really interesting because, going back to last year, like you said, they lost a lot of their production, but with the 13 players drafted, I believe only two of them went in the first or second round. So many of those guys were third, fourth, fifth round talents. And now you look at the roster and maybe they don't have as much depth all the way around, but their top end talent, I can't remember a team that had, a Mason Graham who's projected to be a top 10 pick overall, a Will Johnson, a top 5 pick overall, Kenneth Grant. Defensively, I think initially when they lost Keon Sabb, that was pretty surprising to me, and I felt like that was a big loss. And then
It
you
was
hear Rod
brutal.
Moore, yeah, and then Rod Moore tears his ACL in a non-contact injury. So then you start to worry a little bit because then they also lost Mike Sanderstill, they lost Josh Wallace, but you still have Will Johnson, you still have Makari Page, and then what Sherrone was able to do in the portal, I think it was in a span of 2 days, they landed 4 total transfer defensive backs. Mangum from Michigan State, Walker from Louisville, Hall from Albany. He was an All-American in the FCS. Johnson from UNLV. I don't know if they're going to be able to, besides Will Johnson, Makari Page, be at that same level as Rod Moore, Mike Sanders, still like that. But having that depth and that competition, because with DJ Waller, another guy, he transferred to Kentucky. It was sort of, okay, I guess Jair Hill is going to be the starting cornerback too. Now he's got a lot of competition for that spot. And that's just going to make him better and everybody else in that secondary room better. And then defensively, on the defensive line, you look at Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Derrick Moore, Josaiah Stewart. Those were the 4 guys on the D line against Alabama on that goal line stop. I think all 4 of those guys have a chance, especially Kenneth and KG. But even Josaiah, seeing the kind of year he had last year, Derrick Moore, if he continues to develop, all 4 of those guys could be first, second round picks with the draft this year or next year. Picking up another big transfer with Jayshon Barham, who has started at Maryland since he was a freshman. That was huge. We have Ernest Hausman going into his second year in Michigan. In my opinion, and I might be a little biased because I'm a Michigan fan, this is going to be the best defense in college football, in my opinion.
Interesting. I think they have the potential to be the best defense in the nation. I have already come out and said I think they're going to have the best defensive line in the country, and I think their front 7 potentially. I haven't exactly decided on that, but I'm leaning toward it. I do think with the concerns of upside at secondary, like you mentioned, Mike Sainristil, Will Johnson, Rod Moore, and then having Keon Sabb, who I think could be an All-American at Alabama, where he's projected to start along with Malachi Moore. And I think, look, with him in a starting role and another year of development, I think he's going to be really good. In hindsight, that was a painful loss. I don't know if I'd tab them as the nation's best, but they're up there in the same tier or close to the same tier as Iowa, Ohio State, Penn State. Some would put Oregon up there. I think you have to put Georgia up there, given that last year was a little down for their defense and what they bring back. I'm honestly very excited to look at the defense and watch how they respond to an offense that's taking several steps back. What do you make of, specifically looking in again on defense, Michigan plays Texas, they play Oregon, Ohio State could have a great offensive line because they bring back a ton. USC's reshuffled their offensive line, brought back some players. Minnesota might have the best tackle duo in the country. Michigan is going to be facing great offensive lines, physical offenses. Darius Taylor for Minnesota at running back. Bucky Irving's gone for Oregon, but Jordan James is back. And then Travion Henderson and Quinshad Judkins. That's quite a duo to prepare for. Same with CJ Baxter and whoever backs him up at Texas. How do you think that this front will fare against physical offensive lines, and several of them throughout the year, unlike last year where they really only played two, and not having the offense to control the clock, at least to guarantee control the clock like they did last year? What challenges do you think this defense will face, and how will they face against them? How will they do?
Piggybacking off of what you just said with Michigan's offense last year being able to be so dominant and sustain those long drives that allowed the defense to rest and stay on the sideline. We don't know how that offense is going to look. So with the defense being on the field presumably more often, depth is definitely a concern. You look in the secondary, you look at linebacker, you look at the defensive line. There's a lot of question marks. And like you said, Texas, game 2, they open with Fresno State. You're going to see a lot of shuffling in that game. They're going to try to prepare a lot of guys because, Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, yeah, they're great, but they can't play every single snap. Derrick Moore and Josaiah Stewart, they're great. They can't play every single snap. So I think, with all those great offensive lines and all those great running backs, when those starters come out for Michigan, if there's a significant drop-off, things are going to unravel really fast. So that would be my biggest concern, is the depth for Michigan's defense.
Yeah, I'm in lockstep there with you. I've been pouring through offensive lines and looking at teams Big Ten, but more so outside of the Big Ten, because I'm pretty well versed on the Big Ten now, about as well versed as I can get on depth charts and players, especially for the teams that look to be successful this year. And something that I noticed is that while Michigan probably has potentially the 2 best defensive tackles in the country, at least 2 defensive tackles that are top 10, top 5, you have Rayshon Benny behind them, maybe a Noetta, but that's it. Meanwhile, whether it's Georgia or Alabama, Oregon more so at tackle rather than guard, they have multiple players that can just rotate in, and they don't need to play their players for every snap of the game. And, if they rotate, they'll suffer a drop-off. They won't. But Michigan could very well do that, especially, I think, at defensive end, where you lose Jalen Harrell and Braden McGregor. At defensive tackle, it was just Chris Jenkins that left, and defensive tackle last year was already deeper than defensive end. So I completely agree with you there. Speaking of physicality in the offensive line, what do you think when you look at Michigan's offensive line? What are concerns? What are areas of potential improvement, if any? And who do you think is the best player, and also the player with the most questions?
Yeah, I'm higher on Michigan's offensive line than most. I've made a couple posts on Instagram about it. I like what Sherrone did with the portal the last couple of years. Now, obviously, they lose 6 total guys. They lose their entire starting lineup, plus Trente Jones, who started the last couple of games due to Zach Center going down. But you have a couple of guys, and Greg Crippen at center and Giovanni Alhadi, who have been waiting their turn now this is year 4 for them both, where they finally get to start. I mean, Gio, he sat behind Zach and Trevor for 3 years while they started. Most guys would have transferred and they would have left, but he trusted the process. He stayed there. He's gotten bigger, faster, stronger. Greg Crippen is a bigger center than most. He's, almost 6, I think he's 6'4", almost 6'5", 310, came from IMG Academy. Very smart kid. They were able to pick up Josh Preby from Northwestern, who was a captain, a kid that grew up in Michigan and has a lot of love for that program. The concern for me, I like how the interior looks. The offensive tackles are my question mark. I know Myles Hinton's going to be the starter at left tackle, but what concerns me is that last year he was starting the first couple of games, and then he got pulled out and replaced by Ladarius Henderson. And it was an issue with, how quick his feet were, how his pass blocking was, because he's a big guy. He's about 6'7", 330, 340, but he wasn't quick enough, and the pass rush was getting there. And then right tackle, I think what's projected is that Andrew Gentry is going to start. I think he went on a 2-year mission trip, if I'm correct on that. Came back
Yes.
last year. Yeah, got his body back in check, and he's another really big kid. I think he's almost 6'8". So it's not a concern with, are these guys big enough and strong enough. I'm concerned about, are they fast enough in pass blocking, and do they have enough in their tool bag to stop different pass rush moves?
I understand that. Yeah, there's certainly a lack of experience with Gentry. And then Myles Hinton, I think second year with the program and in the system will take a step forward, but he was not an elite or even near elite great offensive tackle last year. He was not one of the best or NFL ready, so there are questions there. And with center Greg Crippen, I think that he's ready, and I think that the interior of that offensive line will be better than many people expect. Michigan will take a step back, but I don't think they'll take as big of a step back as many think. And then, real quickly, at the quarterback position, I think that Alex Orji is going to start. I have heard that some people think Jack Tuttle will start or make a push. I think Orji's athleticism is too big of a trait to ignore and to give up on. And I think in the spring game, he showcased that he's at least good enough of a passer to where if you design open routes for him, use a lot of motion like what Sherrone Moore has done, that you can put him in a position to win and create plays for the offense. Receiver, to me, is almost a bigger question mark than quarterback. There's Tyler Morris, Samaj Morgan, Frederick Moore. I think Michigan has a lot of speed at receiver, but it's a lot of raw, untested talent, and not all of those balls can bounce Michigan's way. That just won't happen.
Yeah, I feel like, it's sort of a lazy comparison just because so many people have used it. But obviously, Alex Orji, he was the scout team quarterback for Michigan against Alabama in the Rose Bowl. And so many people have compared Alex Orji to Jalen Milroe. But I see a lot of similarities. And you go back and you watch Jalen Milroe's film from last year and how shaky he was earlier in the year. And then he kind of settled in, got a little better at passing in the pocket. But I could see Alex Orji being that type of player. Now, back to what you said, where it hasn't been announced that he's the starter. And Kirk Campbell's been interviewed multiple times, and people have tried to get the answer out of him. Is Alex your starting quarterback? And he's, well, Alex is doing a good job. Jack's doing a good job. So I don't know. I would probably put it at a 70-30 right now that Alex Orji is the starter. But
Okay.
Jack Tuttle, reportedly, I mean, the dude's doing a great job in camp. He's doing a little bit better of a job at making reads than Alex is. And going to, the receiving room, like you said, it's a lot of raw talent. We know Samaj Morgan's really fast, but he's a smaller guy. Tyler Morris is a smaller guy. We saw him put the burners on that drag route against Alabama. Frederick Moore had a really nice catch and run in the spring game. And them being able to go in the portal and snag a couple of guys. CJ Charleston is someone that I'm excited about. I think he'll be a reliable target, very good hands. Not a big receiver, but I think he's about 6 foot, 200 pounds. And then getting a Morian Walker back, that was big. I think when they tried to move him to corner, that really, hit him the wrong way. He did not like that at all. And I think that was a big reason he went to Ole Miss.
Interesting.
And yeah, and with, him not getting playing time there last year, Sherrone, well, he was only there for the spring, but, Sherrone talking to him again when he entered the portal saying, hey, man, we'll let you play receiver if you come back here, because they didn't have anybody above 6 foot in the receiving room that, could be a dignified starter. So that was a big pickup to get Amorian back.
Agreed, at least in part for depth. I don't know how he'll do as a receiver, and I know that he's not projected to start right now. Before we move on, name your top 5 players for Michigan on offense and defense.
Defensively, I put Will Johnson at 1, Mason Graham at 2, Kenneth Grant at 3, Jayshon Barham at 4, and Makari Page at 5. Offensively, I'd probably go Colston at 1, Donovan at 2. I'll put Giovanni Alhadi at 3. I think he's going to be really, really good this year. It's my sleeper player. I'll put Samaj at 4. And then projecting that Alex as the starter, I'll put him at 5. I think he's going to be a really good dual threat. I think his running ability is going to be really good for Michigan.
Yeah, I released a poll asking who it was between Alex Orji, Luke Altmaier, Will Howard, and Drew Aller who'd have the most rushing yards. And the unanimous pick was Orji. Now that's just people's opinions, of course, but it seems like everyone kind of has that view that if he's going to start, his running ability will really come through and shine. My top 5 players offensively, it would have to be Colson Loveland at 1, Edwards at 2. I would say it's hard. I'm very high on Hinton, but I'm also very high on Crippen. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go with Greg Crippen at 3, Hinton at 4, and then I would go with Preby at 5. Defensively, it would be Will Johnson 1, Mason Graham 2, Kenneth Grant 3, Josaiah Stewart 4, Derrick Moore 5.
I like that for defensive lineman. I like that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that there are some depth concerns on the D line where you'd almost rather have like Ohio State's depth or even Iowa's compared to Michigan. But that starting 4, you can't. Oh, shout out to Penn State too. I think their D line depth may even be better than those other 2. But for just the pure starting 4, you cannot compete with that defensive line. Even Phil Steele, who didn't rank them at first, said that. He just has a lot of concerns with the depth, which is understandable. Thank you for watching this cut of Touchdown Talk. Remember to like the video to help this channel get into the algorithm and grow as we approach the 2024 season. And also subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so that you can participate in our giveaway at 20,000 subscribers. Help us to grow, join this awesome community, and also be notified when we release new content here on College Football with Sam. I would like to thank my Patreon members for sponsoring this video and channel. A shout out to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal for being $25 a month Heisman members. A shout out to $10 a month American members, all American members, Chris Lane, Connor Little OH, and Ismar. And a shout out to $5 all conference members, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell. Have a great day, guys, and we will see you soon. Bye.